rusting gates of Pennhurst State School and Hospital stand as a grim testament to a bygone era of misunderstanding and cruelty in Spring City, Pennsylvania. This sprawling campus was once home to thousands of individuals deemed unfit for society by the standards of the early 20th century. The red brick buildings now crumble under the weight of time and neglect, while vines choke the life out of the structures that once housed legitimate human suffering. It is a place where the air feels heavy with the sorrow of those who lived and died within its walls. Visitors often report a sudden drop in temperature and an overwhelming sense of dread that permeates the very ground they walk upon, as if the land itself remembers the pain. Constructed in the year 1908, the institution was originally commissioned by the Pennsylvania legislature to care for the feeble-minded and epileptic. The prevailing medical philosophy of that time suggested that people with physical and mental disabilities should be segregated from the general population for the supposed benefit of society. This dangerous ideology led to the creation of a self-contained world where patients were stripped of their autonomy and often their dignity. The architecture itself was designed to be imposing and institutional, with high ceilings and barred windows that reinforced the separation between the patients inside and the free world outside. It was a prison in all but name for those who had committed no crime other than being born different. As the decades passed, the population within Pennhurst swelled far beyond its intended capacity, leading to conditions that can only be described as nightmarish. By the middle of the 20th century, the facility was housing thousands more patients than it was built to accommodate. Beds were crammed into every available space in the wards, and corridors were lined with mattresses where children and adults slept in squalor. The staff-to-patient ratio was woefully inadequate, meaning that even the most well-intentioned nurses and attendants were unable to provide basic care. The stench of unwashed bodies and sanitation issues filled the hallways, creating an atmosphere of hopelessness that settled deep into the bones of everyone who resided there. In the year 1955, a young man named Arthur decided to take a job as a night watchman at the asylum to support his growing family. He was a practical man who did not believe in ghost stories or superstitions, but the reputation of Pennhurst had reached even the neighboring towns. Locals whispered about the screams that could be heard echoing from the campus at night, and the strange lights seen in buildings that were supposed to be empty. Arthur dismissed these tales as the product of overactive imaginations and the natural fear of the unknown. He arrived for his first shift with a sturdy flashlight and a thermos of black coffee, ready to patrol the grounds and keep the peace. His first few nights were relatively uneventful, though the oppressive silence of the campus weighed heavily on his mind. The moonlight cast long and twisted shadows through the trees, making the buildings look like sleeping giants waiting to wake. Arthur spent his time walking the perimeter, checking locks and ensuring that no teenagers from the town were trespassing on the property. However, he soon began to notice subtle oddities that he could not easily explain away. Doors that he had definitely locked would be found standing wide open just an hour later. The sound of footsteps would echo on the pavement behind him. But when he turned around to confront the intruder, the path would be completely empty. One particularly foggy night in October, Arthur was assigned to patrol the tunnels that connected the various buildings of the campus. These subterranean passageways were used to transport food and laundry, and sometimes to move deceased patients without alerting the others. The air down there was cold and damp, smelling of mildew and stagnant water. As Arthur walked the length of the tunnel beneath the Quaker City building, he felt a sudden and intense drop in temperature. His breath began to mist in the beam of his flashlight, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. It was a primal reaction to an unseen threat, a feeling that he was intruding on something forbidden. From deep within the darkness of the tunnel, Arthur heard a sound that froze his blood in his veins. It was the distinct sound of a child weeping, soft and mournful. He stopped in his tracks, straining his ears to pinpoint the source of the noise. There were no children allowed in the tunnels, and the patients were all supposed to be asleep in their wards at this hour. The crying continued echoing off the concrete walls and distorting until it sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. Arthur called out, asking who was there, but his voice trembled and cracked, betraying his fear. The only response was the sound of the weeping turning into a low and guttural growl. Gaining his composure, Arthur moved forward, determined to find the source of the distress. He swept his flashlight beam across the pipes and conduits lining the walls. Suddenly, the light landed on a small figure crouched in the corner of the tunnel. It appeared to be a young boy wearing the drab gray uniform issued to patients. The boy was facing the wall, rocking back and forth in a rhythmic motion. Arthur felt a wave of pity mixed with unease as he approached the child slowly. He asked the boy if he was lost and reached out a hand to comfort him. The air around the child was freezing cold, radiating a chill that seemed to penetrate Arthur's heavy coat. The boy stopped rocking abruptly, but did not turn around to face the watchman. A heavy silence filled the tunnel, broken only by the dripping of water from a leaky pipe overhead. Arthur took another step closer and realized that the boy appeared somewhat translucent. The flashlight beam seemed to pass partially through the child's shoulder, illuminating the dirty concrete wall behind him. Arthur blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dim light. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, But the anomaly remained. The figure was there physically present, yet somehow not entirely of this world. The realization hit Arthur like a physical blow. Slowly, the boy turned his head to look at Arthur. The face that was revealed was a mask of pure anguish and terror. The eyes were dark, hollow pits that seemed to hold an eternity of suffering. The mouth was open in a silent scream that Arthur felt in his mind, rather than heard with his ears. It was a psychic projection of pain so intense that it made Arthur stumble backward and drop his flashlight. The light rolled across the floor, casting chaotic shadows that seemed to dance and writhe on the walls. In the flickering darkness, Arthur saw that he was not alone with just the boy. Other shadowy figures were beginning to materialize from the gloom further down the tunnel. These new figures were twisted and malformed, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. They were the spectral remnants of patients who had spent their lives confined to cribs and restrained in straitjackets. They floated towards Arthur with a hunger that felt predatory. The air in the tunnel grew thick and viscous, making it difficult to breathe. Arthur scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers numb with cold and fear. As he grasped the metal casing and shone the beam forward, the figures recoiled slightly from the light, but did not retreat. Arthur managed to get to his feet and turned to run. He sprinted back the way he had come, his footsteps echoing loudly in the confined space. Behind him, he could hear the sound of shuffling feet and the whispering of 1,000 voices. They were whispering names and pleas for help, overlapping into a cacophony of madness. The tunnel seemed to stretch longer than it should have, as if the building itself was warping to keep him trapped inside. He saw the metal door leading to the outside world in the distance, but it seemed miles away. The lights in the tunnel flickered and died, plunging him into total darkness, save for his shaking flashlight beam. He burst through the heavy metal doors and collapsed onto the wet grass outside, gasping for air. The night air felt warm compared to the unnatural chill of the tunnels. He lay there for a long time, staring up at the cloudy sky, trying to rationalize what he had just witnessed. He wanted to believe it was a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the eerie atmosphere of the asylum. But deep down, he knew what he had seen. He had looked into the face of a suffering that transcended death. He had seen the forgotten souls of Pennhurst, and they had seen him. He resigned from his position the very next morning. Years later, the conditions at Pennhurst were exposed to the world through a 5-part television news report by Bill Baldini titled "Suffer the Little Children." The footage shocked the conscience of the nation, showing half-naked children wandering aimlessly on excrement, covered floors, and patients tied to beds for days on end. The public outrage was immediate and immense, leading to a landmark federal court case that eventually ordered the closure of the facility. It was a victory for human rights, but it came too late for the thousands who had already lived and died in misery within those walls. The asylum officially closed its doors in 1987, leaving the buildings to rot. Today, the campus of Pennhurst is a destination for paranormal investigators and thrill seekers from around the world. The energy that Arthur encountered in the tunnels in the 1950s has not dissipated with the closure of the hospital. If anything, the abandonment of the site has allowed the spirits to claim the space fully. Ghost hunters regularly capture electronic voice phenomena, or EVP recordings, that contain clear and intelligent responses to their questions. Voices say things like "go away" or "help me," and sometimes they even call the investigators by name. The Mayflower and Devon buildings are considered hotspots for this aggressive activity. One of the most terrifying recurring phenomena is the physical interaction that visitors experience. People report being pushed or scratched by unseen hands while walking through the darkened corridors. Some have felt their hair being pulled, or have experienced the sensation of someone breathing heavily right next to their ear when no one is there. These physical attacks are often attributed to the spirits of former staff members who were abusive in life and remain hostile in death. The negative energy they left behind acts as a battery, fueling the manifestations that continue to terrify those who dare to enter the property after dark. The basement of the King Building is another area that is avoided by even the most seasoned paranormal researchers. It is said to be the domain of a dark entity that manifests as a large shadow darker than the surrounding night. This shadow figure has been seen peeking around corners and blocking doorways, preventing people from leaving certain rooms. Witnesses describe a feeling of immense malice emanating from this entity, a hatred that feels ancient and purely evil. Some believe this could be the spirit of a sadistic doctor or attendant who took pleasure in the pain of the patients under his care. Photographers who visit Pennhurst often find anomalies in their images that were not visible to the naked eye. Orbs of light and misty apparitions appear in photographs taken in the administrative buildings and the dining halls. In some rare instances, clear faces have been captured peering out from the dirty glass of the windows on the upper floors. These faces often bear the distinct features of Down syndrome or microcephaly characteristic of the patient population that once lived there. It serves as a chilling reminder that while the bodies have been removed, the personalities and the souls remain tethered to the location. The tunnels where Arthur had his terrifying encounter remain one of the most active locations on the property. Modern explorers describe the same drop in temperature and the feeling of being watched that the watchman felt decades ago. The sound of children crying is still heard echoing off the damp walls, along with the sound of metal gurneys squeaking as they are pushed along the concrete floor. It is a time loop of trauma, playing over and over again in the darkness. The stone and brick of Pennhurst seem to have acted as a recording device, capturing the intense emotions of the past and replaying them for eternity. There is a specific room in the Quaker City building where a poltergeist is said to reside. Objects are frequently thrown across the room, and heavy doors are slammed shut with tremendous force. Investigators have set up static cameras in this room and have captured chairs moving on their own and equipment being knocked over. The spirit here seems desperate for attention, acting out like a frustrated child who cannot communicate their needs. It is a heartbreaking display of the confusion and anger that many of the patients must have felt during their lives, unable to understand why they were imprisoned. The tragedy of Pennhurst is not just in the ghosts that haunt it, but in the reality of what happened there. The system failed the most vulnerable members of society, stripping them of their humanity and hiding them away in the dark. The ghosts are merely the symptom of a much deeper spiritual wound that was inflicted on the land. Every creak of the floorboards and every whisper in the wind is a reminder of the thousands of lives that were wasted in this place. The suffering was so concentrated and so prolonged that it has stained the fabric of reality in Spring City. Skeptics argue that the haunting of Pennhurst is merely the result of suggestion and the creepy atmosphere of the abandoned buildings. They claim that the peeling paint and the rusty medical equipment create a psychological state where the mind invents monsters. However, the sheer volume of corroborating evidence from independent witnesses suggests otherwise. Police officers, security guards, and construction workers who have no interest in the paranormal have all reported unexplainable events on the grounds. Their stories are consistent and specific, pointing to an objective reality behind the haunting. One particularly disturbing account comes from a group of teenagers who trespassed on the property in the early 2010s. They entered the Devon building on a dare and made their way to the third floor. As they explored the rotting wards, they found a room filled with old metal cribs. Suddenly, all of the cribs began to shake violently at the same time, creating a deafening racket. The teens fled in terror, but not before one of them saw a woman in a white nurse's uniform standing at the end of the hall, pointing a finger at them in accusation. The legacy of Pennhurst serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of dehumanization. When society decides that certain people are less than human, it opens the door for atrocities that leave a permanent mark on the world. The spirits that linger here are forcing the living to acknowledge their existence. They are refusing to be forgotten, refusing to be swept under the rug as they were in life. Their whispers are a demand for the dignity they were denied. and a warning that our actions in life echo long after we are gone. Many psychics and mediums who have visited the site claim that there are layers to the haunting. There are the residual hauntings, which are like recordings. And then there are the intelligent spirits who are trapped. These trapped souls are confused and often unaware that they have passed on. They continue their daily routines, waiting for medication that will never come, or looking for family members who abandoned them long ago. The mediums often leave the site in tears, overwhelmed by the collective grief that hangs over the asylum like a shroud. The administration building, with its grand facade, hides its own dark secrets. It was here that the decisions were made to cut funding, to increase overcrowding, and to ignore the reports of abuse. The ghosts in this building are described as more authoritative and oppressive. Visitors report feeling a crushing weight on their chest and a sense of judgment. It is as if the bureaucratic evil that ran the institution has manifested into a spiritual force that still tries to control anyone who enters its domain. As nature slowly reclaims the land, wrapping vines around the brick and breaking through the roofs, the atmosphere only becomes more surreal. The juxtaposition of the beautiful Pennsylvania greenery with the decaying structures of the asylum creates a visual representation of the battle between life and death. But even as the buildings fall, the energy remains. It is soaked into the soil and the foundation stones. It is likely that even if every building were razed to the ground, the haunting would continue. The trauma is too deep to be erased by demolition. The screams that were once muffled by the thick walls of Pennhurst are now heard by anyone brave enough to listen. The whispers of the forgotten patients have become a roar that demands attention. Documentaries, books, and horror movies have been inspired by the location, ensuring that the story of Pennhurst spreads far and wide. In a way, the ghosts have succeeded in their mission. They are no longer hidden. The world now knows their sorrow and the injustice they endured. For those who visit the site, the experience often leaves a lasting mark. It is not just the fear of the supernatural, but the heavy emotional toll of witnessing the scene of such a great tragedy. People leave with a profound sense of sadness and a renewed appreciation for the freedom they enjoy. The ghosts of Pennhurst are not just monsters in the dark. They are messengers from history. They stand as eternal witnesses to the darkness that lies within the human heart when compassion is forgotten. As the sun sets over the twisted metal and broken glass of the Pennhurst Asylum, the shadows lengthen and the silence deepens. But it is not an empty silence. It is a silence filled with watching eyes and waiting spirits. The patients are still there, wandering the halls of their prison, bound to the place of their suffering. And if you listen closely in the dead of night, you can still hear them whispering, begging to be taken home, begging to be loved, begging to be remembered.